Hello and welcome to another episode of the Africa Within podcast, where we explore the stories shaping our health, peace and climate across the continent. I'm your host, Notobeko Mlambo, and today we are diving into a conversation that couldn't be more urgent: climate change. In this episode, we speak to two inspiring journalists from Kenya who are on the front lines of climate reporting, from prolonged drought in northern Kenya to the impacts of urban flooding in Nairobi. They are capturing not just the challenges, but also the local solutions and resilience of communities. This conversation will touch on how journalists tell stories of climate change in ways that engage, inform, and inspire. We'll also look at the barriers that we face as journalists and what opportunities are emerging to reshape the climate conversation in Africa. All right, thank you so much for joining me today. Could you please introduce yourself? We can start with you, Dennis, and then Malemba.
Yeah, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending wherever it is you're listening us from. I'm Dennis Tall Aseto, a journalist with the Standard Media Group based in Nairobi, Kenya. I am interested, I have a bias in climate and science reporting. I have been into climate reporting for around 3 years now. Pretty much that's pretty much we shall be discussing more within the show. Yes.
All right. Malemba.
Okay, I'm not a broadcast person, so please you'll excuse me whatever I say. Anyway, my name is Malemba Mkongo, Kenyan-based journalist, award-winning journalist, who has a bias on science and climate change. I'm currently an editor handling science desk at People Daily, which is under MediaMax Limited.
All right, thank you so much. Dennis, could you just please tell us how you first got involved in reporting on climate change?
So my first encounter with matters to do with climate change, I'd say it started more on a personal level, because I remember at a time when I visited my friend who lives in Makwini, and I looked at the ravages that happened in Makwini at the time. And I just got curious, started asking questions like, what's happening? And so I came back to the office, I shared that with my editor, and my editor was like, why don't you go do a story on what exactly is happening in Makwini? Then we see how to go about it. So from the first story that I did about how it was dry, the drought at the time in Makwini County, is what got me into climate change reporting. Because I remember now from then on, we formed a science desk that had a climate change aspect in it, and we even got an editor into it. Fortunately enough, we're getting towards the Africa Climate Summit, and through Africa Climate Summit, I remember that was my very first commissioned and paying job, because I remember at the time we got around 12 million shillings from the government to cover that event. And from then on, it has always been getting to know more and understanding more about climate change, what it's all about. And yeah, pretty much. So for me, it started from seeing my friends suffer, and then the interest kept on growing. Yeah.
For you, Malemba?
So initially, I was environmental reporter. So my first time to report on climate change was back in 2019, and at that time there was drought all over Kenya, and also it was affecting wildlife animals. It's normal to hear that livestock are dying from hunger, but it's very unusual to hear that livestock, elephants, giraffes are dying from hunger. So we had a trip to Amboseli where we could see elephants have died, giraffes, I don't know what. So it really affected me because I come from a wildlife family where people conserve wildlife. And so at the end of it, we were told that it's the effect of climate change. So I got curious. How can climate change affect even wildlife? I mean, these are animals that live in the wilderness. How can they be affected? So I got interested in climate change. I went back to the newsroom, research about climate change, and I could see all the impacts, all the effect that is going to have. That at that time they were the effects that we could see at that time, and the effect that we were going to see in the future. So I got so curious about it, and I think that's the time it got into me that I need to be reporting on climate change.
Dennis, you mentioned that when you started, you had gone to a place called, you said Makwene County.
Makwene,
yeah. What have you found to be some of the key climate-related issues in those communities?
So at the time, Makwene, there was pretty much just drought in the country, and I think it's pretty much around the same time that elephants as well were dying So during the time, I went to Makwene. From Nairobi to Makwene is around 2 hours, But you get to Makwene and you would look at how dry it was. You would look at, because mostly it's an agricultural, it's a rural area. People depend on agriculture. It was so bad that people had resorted to boiling mangoes because food crops had dried up. So they would boil mangoes for them to survive. And you look at the rivers that were there had dried up. So there was no water, there is no food. And it was just a sad sight to look at. And that got me thinking on what exactly is happening. Why are we here? How did we get here? And then we realize it is climate change and that something needs to be done. So if you to your question now, it is the drought that was there, the heat that was there, unavailability of food that was there, the drying rivers, and how difficult it was for people in Makwene to just survive.
Yeah. For you, Malemba, what would you describe maybe as a state of climate change reporting in Kenya?
I'll say that at the moment, climate change is big. I mean, climate change reporting is big in Kenya because, you won't find any journalist who is not aware of one aspect of climate change. I think, I don't know if it's a survival tactic or what, but I think majority of us journalists in Kenya, we are aware of what climate change is. We can report comfortably around climate change, even though some of the journalists are not so into it, but they have an idea of what climate change is. What is missing is the the in-depth reporting of how climate change is affecting communities. We are more of around policy, around whatever is happening, the discussions that are happening on the higher level, but not how it's affecting the communities in the villages, in our rural homes, even here in the cities. And I think one of the reasons behind that is due to lack of resources, adequate resources, because not so many newsrooms at the moment are stable to finance or to fund a journalist to go and report, let's say, 1,000 miles away from the city. So our reporting is mostly confined within where we are. And maybe for those who can do stories or can do articles away from where they are or away from the cities, are those who are funded. That's the only challenge we have in Kenya. But I can comfortably say that as journalists, as reporters, we have an idea. We have an idea of what climate change is compared to other countries or to other journalists I meet away from Kenya. I think we are better off.
I'd say the same about South African journalists. I think they're very much aware of what is happening. I mean, we also have we have similar problems, I think, within the continent. drought, water scarcity is a huge thing in South Africa. And in 2022, we had floods in Durban, and a lot of people lost their lives. So I think the stories are quite similar, and I would confidently say South African journalists are also aware of what is happening. Though I'm not so sure about communities. I think they often think that it doesn't affect them directly. For you, Dennis, what have you found to be some of the challenges when covering climate change stories in Kenya?
I think for me, the greatest challenge would have been the same as Malemba. It's all about resources to cover climate change as in-depth as we should, in the sense that, first of all, climate change is a science-intensive subject. It is huge on science, whichever way you want to look at it. And that would mean for journalists to be able to bring up the very best, there needs to be capacity building and training. It's like going back to class. And most of media houses do not have these resources to train journalists. So you find with that in mind, there will always be in terms of information, knowledge, and know-how, unless you as a journalist go out of your way to find out what's up, it will be really difficult for one to report on that in terms of facts, bases, terminologies, even knowing where to get all this information from. So there's that part of resources and funding, and also just support from media houses as well, because if you look at our media houses, what usually sells first is usually three things. So there's usually politics is number one, then there is money, and then there is sex. That is what sells to any media house. So when you bring about another conversation around climate change, it's in the science category. A lot of Kenyans, one would argue, do not really see the need of daily reporting on this. So there's always that balance and struggle in convincing even your editors to accommodate your stories on board, because then again, the media house style, there is politics, there is money, business, and then there is sex. So you find climate change comes as the least of priorities. Yet if you look in terms of the priority that it needs, should actually be what is making story one, should be making the headlines on our papers. But because people don't understand the need of it, or also just the culture that has been there for a very long time, that struggle on finding the balance has always been an issue for me.
Yeah. So I met you both during a training, and that we were being trained on gender responsive reporting on climate justice. The fact that we still have to be trained to center, women or gender when we report on climate change, obviously it means that there's a long way to go, I guess. Mm-hmm. How do you think us as journalists can ensure that women and other marginalized groups' voices are centered in climate storytelling?
Yeah, so like I'm just from saying, there is need for further training, right? And you realize that I've before had interviews on climate change and women. Understand what I mean? And you have that discussion based off. I had that discussion based off what I understood. You know what I mean? But through the training that we had, I'm able to look at the reporting on climate change and gender in a more in-depth manner than what I used to look at. Because most of the time we can realize whenever there is any struggle, catastrophe, disaster, those that suffer most even in terms of war is always women and children. When we talk about drought, it's women and children who suffer most. When it's climate change, it's women and children. But what exactly do we mean when we say women and children? So you look at stuff to do with hygiene, like we were being told. Because we're talking in terms of, fine, there is climate change, people have destroyed the environment, the waters are dirty, women are washing clothes there, they are bathing there, but what does that do to the hygiene? There was also a discussion that we had in terms of sanitary towels going biodegradable. You also look at even in terms of wording and policies that come in place that directly affect women. So it is about such initiatives that help us look at, in terms of gender reporting on climate change, on a broader perspective, as opposed to, okay, so it's climate change, it is women who cook, there is no food, they struggle to go look for food. And that's it. That has always been the story when you're reporting on gender. Or it's a man has gone to look for food, has left the wife and children, so the woman is struggling to cook for children because there is no money. But now this is the training opened up in terms of policy level, decisions that should be made and tailor-made to address women issues. And I'd say those are things for me that help me in my reporting in one way or the other, and just makes me be a good journalist at the end of the day. I sound smart, you know what I mean?
Can I also add something?
Yes, you can, please.
Learning doesn't end. We are learning new things every day. And if you're not learning, my grandma used to tell me that if you don't learn one thing every day, then I think you need to leave this world. So for training, for such trainings, they are very critical. Why? Because they give us different perspectives on different issues. We learned that one of the things that I learned is that we are always portraying women as these sufferers. Should I call them sufferers, or people who are suffering? The impacts, the effects of climate change. But I came to realize, and looking at how I've been doing things, I came to realize there are a lot of things women are doing out here to not only to mitigate, not only to adapt, but also to survive. They are doing so many things because I think that is like a mechanism to cope up with whatever is happening to them. You'll find that, like, from the community I come from, we have so many projects around climate change, and these projects are being led by women. And why have I never told a story about whatever they are doing? I've always focused on what made them do whatever they are doing, the problems they used to face. They were left by their husbands. They used to burn charcoal, and now since trees, the government banned people from cutting down trees, then they no longer have a source of income. Blah blah blah. So, training makes us see things on different perspectives. So it's very important. Even if with all my years of reporting, but I still think I'm ready to sit on in a training and get and learn something new.
Because most of the times we're looking for problems and challenges instead of solutions. So I think these trainings, they definitely give us a different perspective, and we look for solution stories instead. So you Malemba have been to COP twice.
Yes.
Could you please talk about that experience and maybe what it's like reporting on a global event like that, but from a Kenyan perspective?
Okay. So how will I explain it? First time was in 2021 during the COP26 in Glasgow. And it was just by chance, I think I had applied, and then that person had, I don't know what issues. The person had applied to an organization, and the person who was picked for that scholarship or for that fellowship could not make it to Glasgow. I think he had some challenges in getting maybe visa. I don't know what was the problem. What I know is that I was contacted. I was told, I was asked, do you have your passport? Yes. When is it expiring? And I said, it has a long way to go. So can you send us the copy? It's okay. I sent. So remember, they haven't told me that I've qualified for the fellowship. So we proceeded with the conversation, and then they said, can you be ready? There's one person who we picked for the fellowship, but we are not sure if he's going to make it. So can you be ready? We're not saying that you'll be going, but can you be ready in case it fails on this other side? Then you'll take his place. And I was like, it's okay. I've never prayed for anyone, for any bad luck to end for anyone. But I was there praying that, oh God, please make it fail on that side. So I think that was the first time, not the first time, but I think that was my first bad prayer for God to answer, because like a week later or 2 weeks, I was told, you have to go to COP. So I underwent training first on issues that I need to be looking out for before the conference, and during the conference, and after the conference. And so on that, then I travel, and it was, there's that pressure from my newsroom, from my sponsors, because I have to, besides reporting on what I want to report, I need to report on their agendas. That is something as African journalists, we really struggle with, because we are sponsored to go there. And so you have to, and they always have their agendas at the COP meetings. So you have to be there during their meetings. You have to report on whatever they're discussing. So it's always a pressure. And maybe at that time you want to, they have a discussion. There's another different discussion that touches on your country. So you cannot split yourself. So in the evening, you'll wonder, your editor is going to call you, why don't we have this story, and yet you're in Glasgow? I mean, you cannot divide yourself. Also, you need to remember that I've been brought here. So I cannot ignore this side and then focus on this side. So even if you have priorities in COP, you have to shelve them at times. So I reported the pressure. So because I was a newbie in reporting these issues, I used to follow, other people. So I think I missed a lot of good stories. And but my sponsors were happy, because I used to report faithfully about their agendas. But on the other aspect of reporting around discussion around Africa and Kenya, I missed a lot of stories. I used to sit down and review what our competitors have written, and I will see they're having, I don't know who was in this discussion, and I was there. I was like, what time did this happen? I was like, around 2, but I was around. I was not aware of all these. There were so many things that I was not aware as a journalist. Then came COP 2028 in 2023. I don't want to say I was an expert, because in between there I reported on Africa Climate Summit. Yes. I reported on some other conferences also, COP 16 for biodiversity. So I think I was I had become aware of what I was expected to do. I had become aware of how I'm going to divide my time around meeting the needs of my sponsor, and also being present during the discussions around Kenya. So in 2023, I did better. For the Dubai discussion, for the Dubai conference, I think I did better. I did so many stories. I was among the people who broke some of the stories. Some of the stories we have from the discussions that were happening in Dubai. Yes. So I can say my experience has been good. I'm ready for the next. I'm ready for Brazil. I want to go and samba. I'm still looking for a sponsor. The secret is always looking for a sponsor early. Also, once you are taken there, you need to have a good record with your sponsor, because they're the people who will be willing to take you back next time. If you don't perform according to your agreement, then they are going to abandon you. I mean, the next call, they won't consider you. So you have to be very strict or to adhere to the agreement. And then another thing that another experience that I cannot forget to mention is the fact that there are so many things happening in a meeting. There are so many people. You cannot. You have to be. You have to know who is going from your country, which organization will be there, which delegation from the government will be there, so that they can be tipping you off whatever the discussion are happening, because you cannot rely on the public announcement that will be made later. So you have to have someone inside who can tell you the discussion are happening, but there's a disagreement. The African leaders are about to stage a walkout. So you need to know who is going, and is this person willing to tip you off some of the things that are happening? And then another thing is that we African journalists are always blamed that we don't highlight issues around Africa being discussed at the COP meetings. But we cannot, because they haven't sponsored us. When I have time, if I'm at the conference and I have time, then I will attend your discussion. But if I don't have time, or if your meeting collides with another meeting which is sponsored by my sponsor, then I cannot attend to your meeting. So that is always an issue. There's always a fight between journalists and African organizations. But in recent years, like for the last 2 years, I can see there are African organizations that are actually funding journalists to go and report from these conferences.
Yeah. So you're saying we need more African organizations sponsoring journalists to make sure that we cover the continent while we are.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
totally. Because I could see some of the organizations, they carry a huge delegation, but zero journalists. Why are they doing that? Why can't you include at least one journalist in your delegation?
For you, Dennis, for meetings like COP, how can we ensure that the coverage is relevant and understandable to our local audiences in our countries, if we get an opportunity to cover such a huge event?
How I look at it is, for a very long time, the story of climate change and its ravages in Africa has always been skewed to be a story of hopelessness, it's just a story of sadness, which means that us as Africans, as African journalists, we must be able to tell our own stories and solutions that we have, because it will be a lie to say that there is nothing that our governments in Africa are doing to address climate change. There's a lot that is happening, but these stories are not being told because, first of all, government bureaucracies in African countries is a concern, because governments do not make it easier for us to get this information. That's number one. Number two, you realize that a delegation, we have the Africa group of negotiators who go to these COPs to put the African agenda on the table. Yeah. But these delegations go there with no plan of having any journalist who would then table their reports, their negotiations, their headliners in these meetings for Africans to know this is our agenda. We have presented these to the other negotiators from the other countries, and this is what they're saying, and we are unable to move forward because of A, B, C, D. As Malemba said, we see huge delegations that go there, but no plan of having any journalists. We have governments say, if we have the SADC region, we have the East African region, we have the Maghreb region, we have the Western Africa countries. If they could just decide to sponsor a number of journalists as a bloc, including African Union having set number of journalists that they are sponsoring across the continent to go cover the African agenda at the COP, then we'd start seeing African stories coming from the COP getting to our newsrooms easily. Because that would mean, if you look at climate science journalists, it's a very small pool. Like in Kenya, we can count each other. It is a small pool of individuals, and we could leverage on that such that if one of us is there, they are able to share these stories with those who do not have an opportunity to go, and have these stories published across various media houses, And if we, us as journalists as well, just deal with this aspect of, I am a journalist from Standard Media, Malemba is from People Daily, but we are fighting among ourselves that it is only me who needs to have this story. Malemba might as well go to hell. Let her look for a story on the other end. We are not helping the cause. So I'm looking at a situation where if we could all, as climate change and science journalists, started being united and speaking in one voice, we are able to start telling the African story with regard to climate change in a better way. Because I will tell you one thing for a fact. Our stories will never be told by journalists from the global north. We have seen that happen. All they know about Africa is not our beautiful highways, not our beautiful beaches, it's not our great economy, it's not the beautiful people. It is always about the story of hopelessness, sadness, drought, children dying, and sick people. We have to tell our own stories. And as Malemba said, you find that even international organizations would come here. Here's the thing, they would come here and sponsor me to go to COP, but with an addendum that I have to cover their agenda. That means my media house that is domiciled in Kenya, I am carrying the agenda of someone from the global north. If other organizations in Africa would think on how they can take advantage of us to be their PR machines, we are home well and dry. So those are challenges here.
Do you think that the summit itself, it reflects the climate realities of our people, of our African people?
Wow. You see, what I've gathered with COP, and maybe Malemba will correct me, but every other person that I've had a conversation who's gone to the COP always says, this is always the line. COP is always a political agenda and affair. It is as if people go there, you'd imagine that there is someone who's going for a campaign to be elected president. It is purely political. So when it comes to COPs reflecting the actual picture of climate change, we'd say those who are there know exactly what is happening. They know what needs to be done. But because the narrative is being controlled by those who have destroyed, because you see, when you go to COP, the pressure is always on those who have destroyed the world more to take responsibility. Yet they're the ones who are controlling the narrative. What is their role? They always get there to change the narrative and to make it difficult for them to be accountable. So you'd say the real picture of what needs to be gotten from COP is never gotten, because, again, it's Total who's sponsoring COP. What do you expect from Total? They will always want to drill at the Congo. It is Coca-Cola. What did you hear from them? They will always want to continue producing plastics because their sodas have to be sold. So the real picture doesn't come out. But do they know what needs to be done? Yes,
they do.
One thing that makes me so angry with the COP, especially when it comes to finances, is the line they use, not to be exact, or not the exact words, but what we can do is we can give you money, but in form of loans. I mean, is that helping the continent? Is that helping us? It's not. When they give grants, which we ain't paying back, they usually come with so many conditions. They cannot give out their finances without any conditions. And I think one of the things that has contributed to this is because we don't, as Africa, we don't have a voice of our own. We don't speak in union. we are usually divided. Or you might decide, during the climate summit, they decided that they are going to speak in one voice. Then they went to COP, and everyone was speaking whatever they wanted. And you wonder, when are we going to agree on one issue as Africa? Then that's where that's how the rich or the wealthy countries take advantage of African nation, because we don't speak in one language compared to let's say Asian countries, or is it what islands, the islands, the small islands, they usually come to the COPs with one voice. We have agreed that we want this and this done. You need to do it. If you don't do, then we are not negotiating. They usually, you can see them walking out of discussions because another country has said no or has said this. So for us, African countries, I think we need to learn to speak in one voice. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, let's bring it back to us journalists. How do you think we can make our climate stories relatable to our local audiences?
Okay, personally, what I really try to do with my show on TV, or even when I'm writing, is I try to tell the stories of the communities. Like government policy and whatnot. It's always important, yeah? But I feel like the stories that come from the communities, for me, is what is key. Because when you talk about climate change and the ravages that continue to be felt, it is not the government that feels it. It is not parliament that feels it. It is that farmer who's unable to have a good harvest. It is that farmer whose 100 cows are dead. So telling the story from a community level and a community angle, I feel resonates more with the people, because you realize these conversations has always sounded so elitist. It has sounded so sophisticated. It's always in the boardrooms and whatnot. It's always in COPs and people fly in. But people at the ground level are always left behind when it comes to these conversations. So we have COP, right? How about we have a discussion in which we say in Kilifi with the locals about how climate change has affected them, that they understand how climate change has affected them, give them solutions, while at the same time give demands to the government that they have elected to be able to give solutions and represent them in a way that they have it easy, or they see a solution in one way or the other. So personally, for me as a journalist, I try to tell the stories of communities, ensuring that they understand what is happening and that they're even having these discussions among themselves. Because if one farmer understands what is happening, understands how to beat the system, to beat the problem that they have and have a solution, and shares with the community, we are headed somewhere. But the moment we keep on having these discussions, we were in Dar es Salaam, right? We had discussions among ourselves. You could imagine if we had a session in Dar es Salaam with a community that has gone through climate change, and we even come back with the challenge on stories that we would publish on a community in Dar es Salaam that has been affected on climate change. We have had a discussion with them. We have had challenges with them. And once we leave there, they understand their problems. We've given them the solutions. We come back with the story. We publish the same, and we are home and dry.
I don't know if this will be a perfect answer to the question, but I don't know if it's Kenya only or it's a problem everywhere. We have this issue when the COP meetings are nearer. Every TV station, every radio station talks about climate change. And you wonder, the 11 months or the 10 months prior, don't we have stories around climate change? Why do we have to wait until November or October for us to talk about climate change? I'm not being biased, but there's a community of journalists at the coast region of Kenya where they are dedicated to climate change, and their stories are all about climate change, and they're not just about policies, they're about community. They do initiatives with some of these communities that have been impacted by climate change. They do discussions with them. I usually feel so good about whatever they're doing, because I usually feel now we are getting the real feel of how climate change is affecting people. So how can we then, as journalists, especially from those in cities, because we usually cry that we don't have the resources, but I mean climate change is all over. Last year we had floods in Kenya, and one of the areas that was majorly affected was in Nairobi, where we are. Yeah. It's just like from where I stay to that place is like a 1 hour drive, and I don't think if their stories have been told. We usually feel like climate change is about people in the rural, but we have people affected by climate change here in the city. So how about we start talking about people who are affected closer to us, even in the villages where we were born, or maybe where we grew up. Those are some of the stories we need to tell. So we don't have to wait to go and look for stories in another person's. Like for me, I come from coast. I don't have to wait to go and tell a story from Aseto's village. No, I need to start from where I come from. I localized whatever I see. I tell whatever the story we have. I mean, I cannot miss people to talk about our problems. So I think that is one of the things that as journalists we need to do. Let's see what is happening around us. Let's talk about what is happening around us. Then we'll be able to tell stories which will enable us to be seen somewhere, and maybe an organization will see your story and maybe offer to sponsor you to go and do a story in another place.
I think just to add on what you said, just a little bit, is we always think that climate change is about the rural communities. Yeah. It's the rural communities that feed us in these cities. Yet we think as if when the rural communities suffer, we have a way out. My friend, you could have your money, but you will eat that money at the end of the day. But I think it's also critical because we found in these cities that we are in, Nairobi, even the water that we consume comes from outside the city, like comes from miles and miles and miles away that they're pumped into the cities. So I think, like you've said, another problem that we have is climate change, especially around COP in media houses, has been commercialized. So media houses are always asking, what is in it for us? How much money will we get during this COP? So once we look at it, we will look at climate change and whatnot as service to humanity. Perhaps we will be serving our purpose in enlightening and bringing out these stories as we should.
Or what would you like to see change in how climate change is reported in your countries or maybe within the continent?
The way we are reporting, I think, as for me, I would look at it from a continental perspective, because it's easy for me to call Malemba and tell her, "Yo, is how let's come up with a certain bias towards this climate change and go around it in a unified way." But you can imagine what are we reporting really? Are we all about catastrophe? Because I remember there's one time I had a discussion with someone and they were saying, as journalists, we've always taken advantage of communities to tell these stories, in the sense that a community that is going through a difficult time is where we get the juiciest story, because we want these stories to trend and to look good. We're taking advantage of the vulnerabilities of people to tell our stories. I think if we flip that, we start saying we will report on everything, but let us come up with solutions on this problem that we have. Because even the people that we're taking advantage of to tell these beautiful stories that are dangerous and sad, still want solutions on how they can move forward. How can I, in Kenya, during the floods that you had in South Africa? I know you. How about you guide me on which is the best angle to go with this story? Because fine, I will say 20 people died in South Africa. Has that helped in any way by coming up with a solution-based story in South Africa? No. I can say 20 died, then we move on. But if I say 20 people have died, but the government is moving forward to address issues to do with the drainage, it's different. If we all think together as Africans, we can report about the catastrophe, but we can report in such a way that we end up with a solution. That for me, I think is critical.
Yeah. For you, Malemba?
I think collaboration among ourselves as journalists. I usually feel there's this thing of scooping. I don't know if it happens in South Africa, but in Kenya, there's this issue of I don't want Dennis to scoop me.
Like competitive, how you want to be the one that breaks the story.
Yes, I want to be the only person to have that story.
I think it happens everywhere.
Yes, he's laughing, so he understands. It's an issue, it's a problem which I usually feel like it's not doing us any good. I mean, we can go to the same events, but how we are going to do our stories are so different.
Yes.
So how about I come with my resources, you as Nonto, you come with your resources, Dennis, come with your resources from wherever you get them from, whether it's your company or maybe a sponsor. Then we put together these resources and do one major story that will have a major impact. I usually see I'm a lover of following international stories, and I usually see they collaborate within countries, different countries, and they have this major story that gets attention from across the world, and then it has a major impact. So I think one of the things that we as journalists need to do, especially journalists from Africa, because our problems are universal. Whatever problem we are facing as Kenyans, it's the same thing that we are facing as South Africans. You faced floods in 2022. We faced floods in 2024. And there's another country facing similar problem. So how about we sit down and look, what is the problem? Why are we facing floods each year? Or there's one different country facing floods, and have a story that will have an impact not only in Kenya or in South Africa, but continentally. So I think we need to stop being selfish. We need to stop being selfish and maybe using Dennis' words, do the work for the community. I mean, we should consider that, or we should not think that we are doing this for ourselves. We are doing this for the people we live with, for the communities that are around us. That is the only solution. Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to add before we close?
I look forward to a day when we go to COP, and as African journalists, we decide that across all the 50-something states, we come up with a single headline on all the papers as the African position. I think that will send shockwaves across the world, because then that will be an African position on us telling our stories. I don't know how that will happen, but I'm optimistic.
Optimistic. All right, thank you.
Maybe my last words. I'll say that we, as journalists, let's look beyond climate change.
Okay.
Let's look beyond the policies. Climate change is affecting the people around us, the communities around us. even I used to eat maybe a certain type of fruit long time ago, but I no longer eat it now because it got extinct. So let's not look so far away from where we are. We need to look at the things closer to us if we are to get good stories. And also, can we stop being selfish? If you have a good story and you think you can collaborate with another person, do collaboration. I remember one of my environmental story that I did collab with someone from Nigeria, and it didn't have an impact in Kenya, but it had a major impact in Nigeria. So those are some of the things that we need to be looking at. What is the impact? What will be the impact if I do partnership with someone from another country to tell the story? Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much to you both for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Nonto.
Asante. Thank you so much to our guests for sharing their insight and passion for climate storytelling. It's clear that journalists play a vital role not only in raising awareness, but in amplifying local solutions and demanding accountability. As Africa continues to feel the pressure of a changing climate, we need more stories that go beyond the headlines, stories that highlight resilience, justice, and the power of community. We want to extend our special thanks to the African Women Development and Communication Network, FEMNET, for the opportunity to participate in the journalist training on gender-responsive reporting on climate change, which took place in Dar es Salaam. This conversation is a result of that training. Don't forget to follow Africa Within podcast for more conversations like this. If you like today's episode, please share it, tag us, and let's keep the dialogue going. Until next time, goodbye.